In all his voluminous writings, the Fukanzazengi, Dogen's universal recommendation of Zazen, is probably his most important writing. And it's an anomaly because whilst Dogen is celebrated for his originality and his creativity, his Fukanzazengi is in large part a copy of an earlier text by a Chinese master, Chung Lu Tsung Tse, and his writing, a manual of Zen meditation. Chang Lu wrote this probably about 150 or so years before Dogen. It's not unique in Dogen's writings for him to respond to the writings of another. So he rewrote the Zazenshin poem of Honzi to emphasize dynamism over tranquility. And there's also some parallels between his death poem and Honzi's death poem. What Dogen does with the Fukanzazengi is that he takes the original text and he appears to miss out the starting paragraph and puts in several paragraphs of his own. And at the end, he puts in a number of paragraphs of his own. And there's some instructions in the text which he misses out. So, for instance, Chang Lu has an instruction: do not strain your body upward too far, lest it cause your breathing to be forced and unsettled. And he also says, press your tongue against your palate, your hard palate. And neither of those passages appear in Dogen's Fukanzazengi. But what's most striking is that right in the middle of Chang Lu's text is the following passage. Therefore, it is said, to seek a pearl, we should still the waves. If we disturb the water, it will be hard to get. When the water of meditation is clear, the pearl of the mind will appear of itself. That passage doesn't appear in Dogen. Now, Chang Lu is using a familiar metaphor in Buddhism, where essentially the water is the mind. The wind is the wind of delusion, which makes the water choppy. And when the water is choppy, it cannot accurately reflect anything. So it can, in the familiar image, clearly reflect the moon. And it's from this metaphor, I suspect, that we get the later metaphors involving the mirror. But in this case, we also get a further metaphor of the pearl. So, as it were, when the water is quiet, when the mind is quiet, the moon can be clearly reflected. So there's clear correspondence upwards, there's clear seeing. Then likewise, when the water is quiet, there's clear seeing downwards to the pearl. and the oyster. Now, in his poetry, collected amongst in other sources by Stephen Hine, Dogen radicalizes this image, and so for him, the wind and the waves are not negative, and the aim of practice is not to eradicate the wind and hence calm the water. So, for example, in one of his poems, he uses the image of a small boat drifting amidst the waves. Small boat, presumably being the individual practitioner of Dogen, and the boat being undisturbed by the wind and the waves, because the boat is empty of a person. So the wind and the waves, instead of being equated with delusion, are now equated with a dynamic vision of interdependence. And we can see his transformation of this metaphor most clearly in another of his poems. And I'll read Heine's translation, which goes as follows. The Dharma, like an oyster, washed atop a high cliff. Even waves, crashing against the reefy coast, like words, may reach it, but cannot wash it away. So we can see in that poem that Dogen further radicalizes this image to bring to the surface very interesting questions regarding the relationship between language and practice, and many other things. And so we move from a position where there's a rather cliched image of tranquility to something which, because the image is radicalized, then the image, as it were, breaks free of specific symbolic interpretation, and so generates new life and a new reflection, and makes possible responses for us to make. So, for example, when I read this poem, it appeared to me that the cliff was the practitioner in Zazen, and a cliff is, as it were, part of the body of all being, but it lacks a head. Except in this case, it does have a head. The oyster is the head. So that's simply my perspective. But the point is that once the image is radicalized, then an infinity of perspectives become possible, feeding back into the dynamism, creativity, and limitless expression of the revitalized metaphor. So my poetic response to this poem was, in Zazen, we are a high cliff, white as bone. The ocean's push is a baby's hand. The Dharma is written everywhere, like white ink on white paper.